Prostitution was once a major trend in the Wild West and considered a very lucrative business amongst other ventures. The establishment of brothels countrywide was the order of the day for every businessman and woman. You will be astounded by the vast number of women who voluntarily ventured into this career path. In this video, you will see some rare historic photos of the most infamous brothels and madams of the Wild West. The Birdcage Theater. The Birdcage Theater was a brothel established in 1881, but like many similar establishments, it was a combination of saloon, theater, gambling hall, and brothel. The brothel was located on Allen Street in Tombstone, placing it right in the heart of one of the most famous frontier boom towns, which was booming from the silver mines. Due to its strategic placement, the brothel catered to miners, cowboys, outlaws, and major figures like Wyatt Earp and gamblers like Doc Holliday. Well, the men of the Wild West opted to be gunslingers, farmers, railroad workers, doctors, and bounty hunters among other occupations. The women did not have as many options besides storekeeping, nursing, and entertainment. Perhaps that's why so many of them delved into S-work as the easiest way to make a lot of money as a woman. The Birdcage Theater is one of the establishments that enable women to make money by selling their bodies. The Gem Theater. The Gem Theater is another similar establishment that offered entertainment, comfort, and physical pleasures to the hard-working men of the Wild West. This brothel offers similar services to the Birdcage Theater, with one major difference. This man, Ellis Alfred Swearingen. Al Swearingen, as he was famously called, reportedly arrived in Deadwood, South Dakota with his wife. He opened the Gem Theater in 1877 to serve as a saloon, dance hall, theater, and brothel in the lawless town of Deadwood, where it quickly became a notorious hub of vice. Al Swearingen and his brothel had an infamous reputation due to how he recruits girls for his brothel and how he treats them after. Al was known for luring young, ambitious women, often from poverty-stricken backgrounds, to work at his theater. Most of them had no idea they would be forced to work as prostitutes, as they were recruited to be singers and dancers. The infamous Calamity Jane reportedly assisted Swearingen in his recruitment and exploitation of young girls. Well, the story of Al Swearingen and his Gem Theater shows the dark side of prostitution in the Wild West. That was not the case every time. In fact, many of the brothels in the Wild West were run by madams, who had themselves been prostitutes before setting up their house. Julia Bullette. One of the most popular examples of this is Julia Bullette and her saloon, which was named after her. Julia Bullette was one of the most famous and beloved figures of the American Wild West, known for her work as a madam. Unlike the Gem Theater and other big brothels, Julia did not manage a large number of women. She worked independently and was more of a courtesan, offering her services primarily to minors and maintaining personal relationships with them. Despite her controversial occupation, Julia Bullette was beloved by the townspeople due to her contributions to the community and participation in local events. She was so admired that the entire Virginia city where she lived and operated mourned when she was murdered in her home in a suspected armed robbery. This man, John Mullane, was the suspected murderer after some of Bullette's missing belongings were found with him. He was hanged for the crime. Although a prostitute and a madam, Julia Bullette kept her operation small and worked independently, rather than exploiting others simply to maximize her profits. Another prostitute come madam is Mary Catherine Horney, popularly known as Big Nose Kate. Big Nose Kate. Big Nose Kate is famous in the history of the American Wild West due to her association with this man, the legendary gunslinger Doc Holliday. While tales of her bravery and daringness have been told over the years, not many people seem to know that she was a prostitute and a madam. She became a sex worker in her teenage years, adopting the name Kate Elder, before becoming famous as Big Nose Kate due to, of course, her big nose. As a prostitute, Kate traveled extensively, racking up more body counts than the outlaws and lawmen she crossed paths with, one of which was Wyatt Earp. Doc Holliday met Kate at the peak of her career, and despite knowing what her occupation was, he fell in love with her. As fate would have it, the feeling was mutual and they both had a long, loving, and toxic relationship together. Despite her relationship with Holliday, Kate continued to work as a prostitute, and even gained employment to manage brothels in some of the towns she traveled to with her gunslinging boyfriend. Although S-work is highly frowned upon and even illegal in almost all the states in the US now, it was considered as just another job in the Wild West. To Big Nose Kate, prostitution was the only job she knew and had ever done in her life, and her love for Doc Holliday couldn't make her quit. Since she could not stay faithful to her lover, Kate expressed her undying love in other ways. Like when she almost burned down an entire town to save Doc Holliday from being lynched by a mob. Kate was also present at the famous OK Corral shooting, which involved Wyatt Earp, Doc Holliday, and other gunfighters. Although without a brothel of her own, Big Nose Kate is one of the most notable madams and prostitutes of the American Wild West. This madam, in contrast to Kate, owned multiple brothels in several states, most notably of which are Bodie, California, Pioche, Nevada, and Deadwood, South Dakota. Madam Mustache. Her name is Eleanor Dumont, famously known as Madam Mustache, due to, well, of course, her mustache. Unlike Big Nose Kate and Julia Bullette, Eleanor Dumont was not a prostitute before she became a madam. Rather, she was a gambler and was quite good at what she does. She was so successful that she opened her own gambling houses in several frontier towns. This also meant that she was a businesswoman. Therefore, she couldn't have passed up the opportunity to invest in the trending and growing business of the time, prostitution. After her arrival in the US, likely from France, Dumont headed west during the mid-1800s amidst the gold rush and other opportunities in the booming frontier towns. First, she made a name for herself as a professional gambler. Then she opened a gambling parlor, which became an immediate success. As her gambling business flourished, Dumont began to expand her business ventures, leading to her investment in prostitution. During the gold rush era, when mining was the commonest employment of labor, gambling and prostitution were some of the avenues many men spent their hard-earned income. Due to this, Eleanor Dumont made a ton of money and continued opening gambling houses and brothels in the mining towns. While she didn't coerce anyone into prostitution like Al Swearingen, she mostly recruited women in financial difficulties or difficult situations. She was a strict businesswoman who set high standards for both her gambling and brothel businesses, so she attracted wealthier clientele and charged more money. The only problem Eleanor Dumont had was her addiction to gambling. Gambling had helped her set up her empire, but it had also been the ruin of it. As she got older, her gambling skills declined and her brothels became less profitable as the gold rush era ended. She also couldn't keep up with the younger madams running their brothels in the area, and she was eventually bankrupt. She took her own life when she found herself in a debt that rivaled her wealth in its glory. Another madam who owned numerous brothels without prior experience as a sex worker, although far more successful than Dumont, is Madam Mary Ellen Pleasant. Mary Ellen Pleasant. Pleasant was a remarkable figure in 19th century America, known primarily as a successful entrepreneur, abolitionist, and civil rights activist. Her major investments were in real estate, boarding houses, and laundries. Not only did Pleasant not have prior experience as an S-worker, but some have claimed that her ownership of brothels was a false claim. Pleasant first amassed a lot of wealth during the gold rush era by depositing silver into the bank and cashing out gold. While working as a live-in cook, she overheard conversations from her wealthy clients and made investments based on that. In no time, she was able to afford her own mansion and continue her investments independently. Since she was of mixed race, many of her white neighbors thought she was a white woman, but behind the scenes, she was helping her fellow blacks escape slavery. In her numerous investments, Pleasant was believed to have invested in brothels, which were highly profitable at the time. Another reason for the suspicion of her involvement in brothels is that boarding managers at the time were responsible for providing S-workers for their guests. It would not be unthinkable for these workers to reside in boarding homes and provide their services to the clients lodging there when requested. While these controversies surround Mary Ellen Pleasant, other brothel madams are famous for their role in prostitution, yet beloved. One of such madams is the beautiful Pearl DeVere, whose famous brothel, the Old Homestead in Cripple Creek, Colorado, has now become a museum. Pearl DeVere. Pearl began working as a prostitute in the early 1890s in the thriving city of Denver until she hit the jackpot and got married to a wealthy man. Her husband passed away shortly after the marriage, leaving her a widow with a hefty inheritance. Pearl used her inheritance to establish herself in prostitution after seeing the potential in the business. She eventually moved to Cripple Creek following the gold rush, where she established the most popular and exclusive brothel in the town, the Old Homestead. Unlike her competition, Pearl's brothel was designed to be a luxurious experience for the wealthiest clientele. Pearl's clientele consisted primarily of wealthy miners, businessmen, and influential figures in the community. It wasn't uncommon for patrons to spend up to $250 a night, which is over $8,000 in today's currency. Despite being in an immoral industry, Pearl was known to be a savvy and strict businesswoman. She maintained a strong sense of privacy, both for herself and for her clients, adding to the allure and mystery of her establishment. She ran her business successfully until 1897, when she died unexpectedly. She was only in her mid-30s. Her luxurious establishment has been preserved for over a century and transformed into a museum to preserve her legacy. Fanny Porter. Fanny Porter was another well-known and respected madam in the American Wild West, famous for her brothel in San Antonio, Texas. Although she was born in England, she immigrated to the United States with her family when she was a child. While not much is known of her life before becoming a madam, Fanny Porter had already established herself as a successful madam in a city crawling with cowboys. In an industry where the usual clientele were ruffies like outlaws, miners, and cowboys, Fanny brought the English class to the business. Her brothel was known for its elegance, cleanliness, and well-dressed women working there. She also had a no-questions-asked policy as long as someone behaved themselves, so her brothel was often used as a safe house by some of the most notorious outlaws of the time. Outlaws like Butch Cassidy, Sundance Kid, and Kid Curry would take refuge at Fanny's brothel after committing robberies and other crimes. Unlike many other brothels that exploit their workers and maltreat them, Fanny's staff enjoyed luxury, class, and freedom. When the era of the Wild West ended and the lawless days of the outlaws, Fanny Porter quietly disappeared from the main stage. Some reports suggest that she returned to England, but nothing is certain besides the fact that she was a mystery to the end. Just like Fanny Porter, Dora Duin was also born in England, immigrated to America, and became a madam at a young age. Dora Duin is also one of American Wild West's most successful madams, famous for running brothels in South Dakota. She got her start in prostitution as a worker, but quickly transitioned to becoming a madam due to her resourcefulness, ambitiousness, and business-mindedness. Dora set up her first brothel in Deadwood, South Dakota, but soon expanded to neighboring towns. Despite the competition in Deadwood among brothels due to their large numbers, Dora's establishment soon rose through the ranks to be one of the people's favorites. She was known for carefully selecting the women who worked for her. While her competitors were exploiting vulnerable women, Dora preferred women who were clean and well-groomed. Her staff of prostitutes attracted high-paying clients, and she in turn treated her employees fairly with decent working conditions. Despite being fair, Dora was also known to be a ruthless businesswoman. She understood the economics of her business and kept her brothels running smoothly. Unlike Eleanor Dumont, who squandered her accumulated wealth, or Pearl DeVere, who died young, Dora Duin retired from running brothels to live her later years comfortably before passing on at 65. A longer-lived madam is the woman famously known in history as Squirrel-Tooth Alice, Mary Elizabeth Haley Thompson, who lived until the age of 92. Squirrel-Tooth Alice. The nickname Squirrel-Tooth Alice came from her habit of keeping pet prairie dogs, a curious choice that added to her notoriety. Mary Elizabeth was kidnapped by a group of Native Americans as a teenager, and although she eventually escaped, she was stranded. Left with no choice, she turned to prostitution, a common occupation for women in the same situation as she was. She traveled through towns working as a prostitute before transitioning into the role of a madam. It was during her travels she met Billy Thompson, a gambler and outlaw who was also the brother of the notorious gunman Ben Thompson. She and Billy had a romantic relationship, but her lover couldn't stop getting in trouble with the law. Alice was known for her sharp wit and tough demeanor. Having been in the business for quite a while, she ran her brothels with a firm hand. Alice recruited women who were already involved in prostitution, or, like when she started, were seeking an escape from poverty. She started a family with Billy Thompson despite his instability, and they had children together. When she retired from running brothels, she had raised enough money to live the rest of her life comfortably while raising her kids. She became the oldest living madam, passing away in 1947 at the age of 92. Maddie Earp. Maddie Earp is another madam who had a really tough life, even tougher than Squirrel-Tooth Alice. Mary left her poor family in Iowa in search of a new life, but ended up as a prostitute instead since she had limited options. Fortunately for her, she met Wyatt Earp, the legendary lawman, and they became romantically involved. Although they were never legally married, she was referred to as his common-law wife. The couple traveled everywhere together until they reached Tombstone, where Wyatt Earp etched his name into history at the popular OK Corral gunfight. Shortly after the fight, Wyatt Earp left her for another woman, Josephine Marcus, with whom he left Tombstone for good, abandoning Maddie. This marked the beginning of Maddie's descent into deep despair. She had relied heavily on Wyatt for emotional and financial support, and without him, she found herself in dire circumstances. She had no choice but to return to the only profession available to her, and others like her at the time, prostitution. Maddie moved from town to town as a madam who only had herself to offer to clients. Unlike more successful madams like Dora Duin or Pearl de Vere, Maddie could not establish her own brothel or build a successful business around prostitution. She was often in poor health and under difficult circumstances. She kept drifting between mining camps in her desperation until she was tragically found dead in a small shack where she lived. She was said to have unalived herself when she couldn't go on any longer. She was only 37. All kinds of brothels and madams existed in the Wild West. Just as the gold rush provided opportunities for men in the form of mining, many women took to prostitution as a profession. While some found fortune and contentment in the business, for others, all they could get was ruin. If you enjoyed this video, like it and subscribe for more.